The flashing lights of Paris Fashion Week never lie. They expose everything, the glitter, the glamour, and the grudges. Beneath the hum of cameras and the rhythmic click of heels, there's always a silent competition, a performance that extends far beyond the runway. On this particular night, at the Balenciaga Women's Wear Spring/Summer 2026 show, Paris was electric. It wasn't just about the clothes. It was about presence, power, and prestige. And among the thousands who attended, two figures turned a fashion event into a battlefield of elegance and ego: Anna Wintour and Meghan Markle. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It started as nothing more than a whisper, a brief, almost imperceptible tension between two women known for commanding rooms. Yet that whisper grew, carried by journalists, stylists, and influencers until it roared across social media. Anna Wintour, the iron-fisted editor of Vogue, had been overheard confronting Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. Her words, sharp and unmistakable, cut through the polished hum of the after-show chatter. "You can't bully my staff." In that instant, what had been a glamorous evening transformed into the most talked-about moment of Paris Fashion Week. The evening had begun in spectacular fashion. The city glowed under a canopy of gold lights, a mirror of Balenciaga's futuristic vision. Outside the venue, photographers shouted names as black cars slid into position like chess pieces. Every celebrity arrival was treated like a royal entrance, until an actual duchess stepped out. Meghan Markle, dressed in an immaculate all-white ensemble, glided past the crowd with the confidence of someone who understood both the spectacle and the scrutiny of fame. Her outfit, crisp, minimal, and symbolic, spoke of purity and power, but also of defiance. She wasn't there to blend in. She was there to reclaim space. Inside, the audience felt her presence before they even saw her. Conversations faltered. The shuffle of phones being raised filled the air, and a dozen lenses zoomed in to capture her smile, her wave, her calculated ease. To the casual observer, it looked like another celebrity making an entrance. But those who had worked in fashion long enough understood that every step, every glance, every seat carried meaning. Meghan had taken her place in a row of power players, designers, editors, brand ambassadors, each representing an empire. And sitting not too far away, with her trademark bob and tinted glasses, was Anna Wintour. Wintour, as always, was a study in composure. Unflinching, unreadable. She didn't need to announce her presence. The room adjusted to her. Decades in the industry had turned her into more than a person. She was an institution, an axis around which fashion revolved. Those who crossed her, whether intentionally or by ignorance, rarely did so twice. But this evening, something was off. Observers would later describe fleeting glances exchanged between the two women, brief, polite, but weighted. It wasn't rivalry in the obvious sense. It was something more subtle, a clash of authority, a test of boundaries. During the show, Meghan appeared fully immersed, applauding occasionally, whispering to the person next to her, and smiling as flashes illuminated her face. Yet, behind that charm lay calculation. Every gesture seemed designed to project calm confidence, the kind that comes from understanding one's own narrative. She was the former actress turned royal turned global icon, a woman who had endured relentless media scrutiny and somehow turned that into a brand. But in a room ruled by Anna Wintour, brands didn't matter as much as legacy. When the final model walked the runway and the applause began to fade, the crowd spilled into the backstage reception area. That's where the night shifted. Fashion Week afterparties are notorious for their hierarchy. Who greets whom, who gets approached, who avoids whom. Assistants darted around with clipboards, models posed for one last set of photos, and PR handlers whispered updates into earpieces. Amid the organized chaos, Meghan reportedly struck up a conversation with a member of Wintour's staff. What began as a light exchange, something about Balenciaga's collection, grew unexpectedly tense. Voices didn't rise, but the tone changed. Observers noticed, and within seconds Anna Wintour was there. What exactly was said next depends on who you ask. But multiple sources agree on one thing: Wintour's composure broke, just slightly, enough for the words to land like a gavel. "You can't bully my staff." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The room fell silent around her. For a woman known to manage crises with a flick of her sunglasses, to see Anna step forward and confront someone directly was a spectacle in itself. Meghan, momentarily stunned, composed herself, smiled politely, and left. But the damage was done. Those words echoed, rippling across the fashion world like perfume in the air, impossible to contain. By midnight, the whispers had turned into stories. By morning, headlines appeared. Paris fashion feud. Wintour and Markle clash backstage. Fashion royalty versus real royalty. "You can't bully my staff." The line that silenced Paris. Each retelling added a layer of intrigue. Some claimed Meghan had been demanding special treatment. Others suggested the entire exchange was exaggerated. But within the world of fashion, where reputation is as valuable as creativity, no one dismissed it entirely. To understand the weight of that moment, one has to understand the forces behind it. Anna Wintour isn't just the editor of Vogue. She's the gatekeeper of modern fashion culture, the architect of trends, and the unspoken arbiter of who belongs in the industry's inner circle. Her nod can elevate careers. Her disapproval can freeze them. Meghan Markle, on the other hand, represents a different kind of power, the power of visibility, narrative, and reinvention. She has built her identity on challenging systems. The British monarchy, the media, and now, perhaps unintentionally, the fashion establishment itself. Their collision was inevitable. Wintour stands for structure, hierarchy, and excellence defined by precision. Meghan thrives on disruption, authenticity, and emotional connection. Both women are used to control. Both are used to being the center of gravity in any room. And when two centers collide, something must give. The beauty of Paris that night was deceiving. Beneath the glitz, this was more than a misunderstanding. It was a moment that revealed how power behaves when it's challenged. Wintour's rebuke wasn't just about her staff. It was about principle. It was about a code of respect that governs an elite world often misunderstood by outsiders. To her, professionalism is sacred. For Meghan, expression is everything. Each stood firm in her truth, but the fallout would show how differently the world measures grace. Outside, as the crowd thinned and the Eiffel Tower shimmered in the distance, journalists filed their notes, influencers uploaded their reels, and publicists crafted their damage control statements. But no one could stop the story from spreading. It was the perfect storm. A clash between two women who represent different empires, different codes, and different definitions of power. The middle ground didn't exist that night. You either saw Meghan as a woman unfairly judged for her confidence or as someone who overstepped in a space ruled by etiquette. You either admired Anna for standing her ground or criticized her for drawing lines too sharply. Either way, the spectacle left an indelible mark on Paris Fashion Week. And yet, beyond the gossip and the glamour, there was something more profound about that encounter. It reflected the tension of our age. The collision between tradition and rebellion, between restraint and expression, between legacy and change. It was a moment that forced even the fashion world to look inward and ask, what does power look like in 2026? Is it silence and grace, or voice and defiance? For Anna Wintour, the answer has always been discipline. For Meghan Markle, the answer has always been freedom. On that evening, those two philosophies clashed under the chandeliers of Paris, and the world hasn't stopped talking since. This wasn't just a feud. It was a statement, a symbolic battle between two eras, two archetypes of womanhood, two definitions of influence. And whether you believe the confrontation was blown out of proportion or not, one truth remains unshaken. Paris witnessed something unforgettable that night, something that turned fashion headlines into cultural history. As the last echoes of the runway applause faded, the city resumed its usual rhythm. But for those who were there, the air still carried traces of tension, admiration, and disbelief. Anna returned to her hotel, her expression unreadable. Meghan, silent in her car, looked out at the Paris skyline, elegant, defiant, unbroken. Both women knew that whatever had happened, it would follow them. It wasn't over. It had just begun. Paris during Fashion Week is not merely a city. It becomes a living organism. Every street corner hums with anticipation. Every boutique window reflects ambition. And every breath carries the scent of competition wrapped in luxury perfume. Beneath the shimmering lights and the frenzy of photographers, an unspoken hierarchy dictates who stands where, who walks first, and who dares to challenge the invisible rules of high fashion. This was the environment on the night when the Balenciaga Spring/Summer 2026 collection unfolded. A night that would quietly etch itself into the city's folklore, not for the fabrics or silhouettes that graced the runway, but for a single clash that redefined the balance of power between two icons. The first hints of drama came long before the show began. By late afternoon, Avenue Montaigne was clogged with tinted cars and restless crowds. The fashion world's elite had descended upon Paris. Editors, models, designers, and celebrities whose names needed no introduction. Inside the venue, the energy pulsed like a current. Assistants scurried with headsets, photographers adjusted lenses, and stylists whispered last-minute instructions. The front row, a coveted territory of its own, was lined with seats bearing names written in crisp typography. One of them read Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. Another, not far from it, read Anna Wintour. Every fashion week has its star moments, but this felt different. Balenciaga, known for pushing boundaries, had already stirred headlines with its unapologetically avant-garde approach. But tonight, the anticipation wasn't just about design. It was about who would show up and what messages their appearances would send. When Meghan Markle's attendance was confirmed that morning, the news had rippled across Paris like an electric charge. Some whispered admiration. It was rare for a royal, especially one who had stepped away from the palace, to attend such an event. Others muttered skepticism, wondering if she sought relevance in a world that had long moved past royal grandeur. Inside, the room dimmed, signaling that the show was about to begin. The lights cascaded down the mirrored runway, illuminating rows of expectant faces. A quiet hush settled, a rare silence in a city that never truly stops talking. That's when Meghan arrived. There was no announcement, no entourage shouting her presence. The double doors opened, and she stepped through them as though she were stepping into destiny. Her all-white ensemble, tailored to perfection, stood in contrast to the black-clad photographers that surrounded her. The gown's simplicity was deceptive. It was meticulously calculated to evoke purity, resilience, and authority all at once. Her hair framed her face softly, and her subtle smile carried the poise of someone acutely aware of the cameras but unwilling to let them define her. The audience responded with quiet awe. Some stood to greet her, others pretended not to notice but glanced from the corners of their eyes. Meghan's stride was measured, deliberate, each step echoing through the hall like punctuation in a sentence that demanded attention. She paused briefly to exchange greetings with a few acquaintances, including a designer she had once collaborated with during her royal days, then took her seat. The flashbulbs danced, but she appeared unfazed, even serene. If there was nervousness beneath her composure, it was invisible. Across the aisle, Anna Wintour remained still. She sat perfectly centered in her seat, her posture immaculate, her gaze hidden behind dark lenses. The bob, the pearls, the impenetrable calm, everything about her exuded control. To the world, Anna was an enigma, a woman whose silence carried the weight of verdicts, whose presence alone could determine a designer's fate. Her name had long transcended the boundaries of journalism. She wasn't just an editor. She was a system, a tradition, a force of nature that dictated the rhythm of fashion's heartbeat. And though her face revealed nothing, those who knew her understood that behind those glasses, she observed everything. The models began their procession, gliding down the runway with mechanical precision. The soundscape, an eerie fusion of electronic hums and orchestral tension, filled the space. Fabrics shimmered, cuts defied convention, and silhouettes blurred gender and form. Yet, amid the artistic spectacle, a secondary narrative was playing out in real time. Whispers flowed through the rows like static electricity. Who had greeted whom? Who had turned away? Whose glance lingered too long? Meghan and Anna had not yet exchanged words, but their proximity carried an unspoken electricity that was impossible to ignore. Two empires, royalty and fashion, sat within arm's reach, each embodied by a woman who had built her power on poise, vision, and the ability to command a room. When the show ended, applause erupted like a wave. The crowd rose, clapping, cheering, capturing the final looks on their phones. Meghan joined in the applause, smiling as the designer took his bow. Anna clapped too, measured and composed, her gestures never exaggerated. Yet as the lights came back up, several attendees later recalled a brief moment when the two women's eyes met. It wasn't hostile nor friendly. It was simply charged. Recognition, perhaps, or challenge. The transition from runway to reception was seamless chaos. Staff members hurriedly rearranged spaces for the after-show mingle. Models changed, photographers fought for exclusive shots, and guests moved toward the adjoining hall, where champagne waited. The air was thick with perfume and speculation. Meghan, surrounded by a few associates, was soon approached by journalists eager for a quote. She declined politely, citing fatigue, and shifted toward the seating area. Observers noted her engaging demeanor as she spoke with stylists and attendees. She appeared genuinely curious, interested, even charming. Yet beneath that warmth was calculation. She knew every interaction was a performance, every expression a headline waiting to happen. Meanwhile, Anna Wintour moved through the room like a ghost of authority. She did not need to announce her presence. People simply adjusted around her, giving her the space and respect she commanded. Her assistants, young, efficient, and impeccably dressed, hovered close, anticipating her needs before she voiced them. Among them was a staff member who would later become the inadvertent focal point of an unexpected confrontation. For most, it was just another elegant evening, another chapter in the endless cycle of fashion events. But for those who paid attention, there was an undeniable tension growing, subtle but present. It wasn't the kind that erupted into open hostility. It was quieter, more dangerous. The kind that begins with politeness stretched thin, with smiles that conceal irritation, with conversations that last a beat too long. The kind that suggests something inevitable is about to happen. As the night deepened, Meghan's presence continued to attract attention. Cameras followed her wherever she moved, and whispers followed the cameras. She was radiant, yes, but also restless. Some speculated she was frustrated by how certain attendees seemed hesitant to approach her, while others insisted she appeared in complete control. Accounts varied, but one detail remained constant. Anna Wintour was watching. Always watching. There's an art to reading a room, and in Paris, few mastered it like Wintour. She knew when flattery masked ambition, when charm disguised insecurity, and when a smile was a precursor to conflict. Her entire career had been built on that intuition. So when she noticed her assistant being approached by Meghan, engaged in what appeared to be an overly assertive exchange, her attention sharpened. To most, it was nothing more than a conversation, but to Anna, it was a shift in energy. And when energy shifted in her vicinity, she acted. But that moment, when observation would turn to confrontation, was still minutes away. For now, the crowd continued to sip champagne, laugh lightly, and pretend that the hierarchy of fashion was unbreakable. The city outside glowed, unaware of the tremor building within the walls of its most glamorous venue. Meghan's laughter rang out briefly, melodic but strained. Anna's gaze followed her movements without a word. The tension between them was invisible yet palpable, like static before a storm. That was how Paris held its breath that night, caught between admiration and apprehension, between two women whose mere presence could alter the mood of an entire room. The models had walked, the cameras had flashed, but the real show was just beginning, one that would not be captured by photographers or choreographed by designers. It would unfold in whispers, in glances, and eventually, in a sentence that would echo far beyond the gilded halls of Balenciaga. The City of Light was about to witness a confrontation that no runway could have staged. a scene that no script could have written. It was the collision of control and charisma, of discipline and disruption. Paris was silent for a moment, as though waiting for the first note of a symphony it didn't know was about to begin. And when it did, everyone in that room, whether they knew it or not, would remember where they were when the balance of fashion's unspoken order began to tilt. The stage was set. The lights had dimmed once, but the real drama was just about to rise behind them. The choice of white was not accidental. In the world of fashion, where color communicates power and silence can scream louder than words, Meghan Markle's decision to appear in an all-white ensemble at the Balenciaga Spring/Summer 2026 show was deliberate. It was a statement, a message wrapped in satin and confidence. The gown, sculpted and sharp, seemed to command its own light under the Paris chandeliers. It shimmered without sparkle, pure and austere, like freshly fallen snow that conceals everything beneath it. To some, it symbolized a rebirth, a duchess reclaiming her space in an industry that had long kept her at its periphery. To others, it was an act of provocation, a color choice meant to stand out against the darker palette of Balenciaga's evening mood, to insist upon visibility even in a sea of black-clad elites. The room had noticed. Fashion journalists whispered to one another as Meghan took her seat. Stylists leaned closer, muttering under their breath. White, at Balenciaga. It was almost subversive, the way she stood out so cleanly, almost too perfectly. Meghan had never been one to follow the crowd, and tonight was no exception. She sat poised, her chin lifted slightly, exuding the calm of someone who knew the weight of every camera turned toward her. She understood the game of optics better than most. She had lived in it, been shaped by it, and at times broken by it. She knew that in Paris, a well-timed outfit could speak louder than 1,000 interviews. Every detail was intentional. The long sleeves that hugged her arms, the structured shoulders, the minimalist jewelry, the quiet strength in her posture. It was less a dress than armor. What the audience didn't see was how carefully calculated that appearance had been. Her team had agonized over it for days, choosing a designer who would make her appear modern yet refined, assertive yet elegant. The message had to be clear. Meghan was not just another celebrity guest. She was the duchess who had crossed continents, survived scandal, and reinvented herself in the court of public opinion. She was there not as someone seeking validation, but as someone reclaiming narrative control. The dress, in that sense, was her declaration of independence. From her seat, she observed the runway with focused detachment. She nodded at certain pieces, tilted her head thoughtfully at others, smiled sparingly. The cameras caught every flicker of expression. Each movement, even the smallest, was dissected online in real time. Fashion bloggers live tweeting her reactions, image analysts commenting on body language. But what the viewers couldn't see, what no camera could fully capture, was the undercurrent of tension growing beneath the glossy surface of the evening. Meghan's serenity was strategic, but it wasn't entirely natural. The whispers surrounding her arrival had already reached her ears. Some praised her elegance. Others called it performative. In the fashion world, perception is a currency more volatile than any market, and Meghan had learned to trade in it with precision. Anna Wintour, seated a few rows away, had also noticed the white dress. Her gaze, obscured by dark glasses, lingered for a fraction of a second longer than usual. Anna understood symbolism better than anyone in the room. She had spent her career decoding statements made through fabric and form. To her, Meghan's outfit was more than a fashion choice. It was an assertion of dominance, a visual claim to purity and grace, perhaps even to moral superiority. White, after all, carries history. Brides wear it to signify virtue, politicians to convey honesty, activists to signal peace. But in the context of fashion, white can also be a challenge, a dare to be noticed. It was as if Meghan had stepped into Anna's realm with a silent challenge stitched into every seam. As the models continued to glide down the runway, the contrast between the two women became increasingly visible, almost cinematic. Anna sat motionless, her every breath measured, her power resting in restraint. Meghan radiated warmth, leaning forward slightly, occasionally applauding. She smiled at the cameras, interacted with those around her, and created moments that would soon circulate across social media. Anna's influence operated in whispers, in what wasn't said. Meghan's in spectacle, in the visible performance of confidence. Both understood influence. They simply wielded it differently. Behind the scenes, Balenciaga's public relations team was thrilled. Meghan's attendance meant headlines. Her outfit, sure to dominate fashion columns, would draw eyes to the collection. Yet, within the inner circles of the industry there was unease. Some feared her presence overshadowed the artistry of the show itself. Others quietly questioned her motives. Was she there to celebrate fashion, or to rebrand herself through it? In Paris, intention mattered almost as much as execution. Every appearance had a purpose. Every smile was strategy. Later, as the lights dimmed to signal the show's end, Meghan's choice of white became even more symbolic. As models made their final procession and applause filled the hall, she stood briefly to acknowledge the designer, her silhouette catching the stage lights. The contrast between her and the darker tones around her was striking, like a single figure of light amidst a sea of shadow. Cameras loved it. Flashbulbs burst as she turned, her expression unreadable, the faintest smile on her lips. She knew what she had just created. A moment. Outside the venue, the photos spread within minutes. News outlets from Paris to New York ran with the images. The Duchess in white steals the spotlight at Balenciaga. Meghan's Paris comeback. Markle radiates in minimalist perfection, but with praise came criticism. Attention-seeking. Too calculated. She knows exactly what she's doing, and perhaps she did. That was the point. Fashion, after all, is communication. The critics didn't understand that every article, every headline, even the negative ones, reaffirmed her presence. In a world that had often tried to silence her, Meghan had learned to weaponize visibility. Inside the venue, Anna remained seated long after the crowd began to move. Her composure never faltered, but her staff, sharp-eyed and attuned to her moods, noticed the subtle tightening of her jaw. She didn't need to say a word for them to know she was assessing the evening's power dynamics. Anna had seen countless celebrities come and go, but few carried the disruptive potential of Meghan Markle. It wasn't just her fame. It was her unpredictability. Anna respected control above all else, and Meghan's brand of confidence, fluid, emotional, narrative-driven, was the antithesis of the structure Anna had spent her life upholding. When Anna finally rose, the crowd instinctively shifted to give her space. Her movement was quiet, deliberate, but it carried authority. Assistants appeared at her side. She exchanged brief words with a designer, gave a nod to a photographer, and began her slow, measured walk toward the reception area. On the other side of the room, Meghan was doing the same, her presence drawing eyes and whispers like a magnet. The two paths, inevitably, were moving toward convergence. In hindsight, those who witnessed the evening would describe it as a study in contrast. Meghan's whiteness against the darkness of the room. Anna's stillness against Meghan's animation. Tradition against rebellion. They didn't speak then, not yet, but the energy between them was unmistakable. The air seemed to thicken, as if the city itself were aware that something was about to shift. Paris, always dramatic, seemed to sense it too. As Meghan left her seat and made her way toward the backstage reception, the cameras followed like obedient soldiers. She paused occasionally for photos, her hand brushing her hair, her smile unwavering. It was the image of ease, but the faint glint in her eyes suggested something else. Focus. She wasn't just attending an event. She was orchestrating a narrative. Anna, meanwhile, entered the same space from the opposite side, surrounded by editors and industry heads. The two orbits were closing in, slowly but surely. What neither of them could have predicted was how that single night, that simple choice of color, would come to symbolize far more than a fashion statement. In the days that followed, commentators would point to Meghan's white ensemble as the spark that ignited an unspoken confrontation. For Anna, it represented intrusion. For Meghan, assertion. It was more than fabric, it was identity. And in Paris, where identity and perception are the true currencies, that was enough to set off a storm. As the reception filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and murmured praise for Balenciaga's bold collection, few realized that beneath the polished surface, a quieter, more personal drama was unfolding. Two women, both accustomed to control, were on a collision course. Their meeting would not be accidental. Their words would not be trivial. But before those words were exchanged, the atmosphere of the evening, the light, the dress, the glances, had already written the prelude. The all-white statement was no longer just a dress. It was a declaration, and Paris, ever the silent witness, was waiting to see how the story would unfold. That was the paradox of Meghan Markle's presence that night. She was both participant and provocateur, both admired and analyzed, both the story and the storyteller. Every choice she made, from her wardrobe to her walk, built toward a moment she couldn't yet see but perhaps sensed in her bones. The confrontation that would soon erupt between her and Anna Wintour was not born of impulse. It was the inevitable crescendo of a night choreographed by ambition and defined by power. Paris had seen countless rivalries, countless egos, but this one felt different. It wasn't about status or fame. It was about something deeper: respect, territory, and the right to command a room. The lights flickered slightly as the evening carried on. Outside, the Seine shimmered under the moonlight, unaware that inside, two worlds were preparing to collide. The Duchess in white, radiant and unapologetic, moved through the crowd with the ease of someone used to being watched. The editor in black, calm and impenetrable, observed from a distance, already calculating. Somewhere between them, the equilibrium of the fashion world trembled, waiting for the first word that would set everything in motion. Anna Wintour's silence had always been her sharpest weapon. In a world of noise, her restraint was power. Those who worked with her knew the rule. When Anna spoke, it mattered. When she didn't, it mattered even more. That evening in Paris, beneath the mirrored ceilings and the low hum of Balenciaga's post-show chaos, that silence began to take on a pulse of its own. Her team could feel it even before they saw her expression. Something had shifted. The atmosphere around her, usually one of measured calm, had become electric, dense, watchful. The fashion world often mistakes composure for indifference. But for Anna, composure was an art. Her movements were deliberate, her expressions minimal, her words few and pointed. Those who had spent years under her gaze understood that the smallest gesture, a slight tilt of the head, the briefest narrowing of her eyes, could signal everything from mild displeasure to absolute fury. And that night, those signals were beginning to show. From across the reception hall, Meghan Markle's laughter carried lightly over the clinking of glasses and the ambient murmur of the crowd. She was surrounded by stylists and journalists, her white dress a glowing beacon amid the darker silhouettes. Her posture was relaxed, but her attention sharp. Every interaction seemed measured, every word chosen to strike the balance between warmth and authority. To many in the room, she looked like someone in complete control. But to Anna, the scene unfolded differently. She saw not poise but performance, not ease but intention. Anna's assistants moved around her in quiet precision, ensuring her glass remained full, her seat empty if she wished to stand, her path clear should she decide to move. One assistant, a young woman named Clara, newly promoted to Anna's inner circle, hovered close, clutching a tablet filled with notes and names from the night's guest list. Clara's expression was a mix of admiration and apprehension. She had heard stories of Anna's unspoken rules, her impossible standards, her legendary eye for detail. Tonight, she was seeing them come to life. As Meghan made her rounds, she eventually found herself standing not far from where Anna and her team were gathered. Whether intentional or coincidental, no one could say for sure. Meghan's PR manager whispered something in her ear, and she nodded, glancing briefly in Anna's direction. It wasn't a challenge, not yet, but it wasn't avoidance either. The two women occupied the same air now, their presence forcing the room to split its attention. Clara noticed first. She felt the shift before she saw it. Meghan had turned slightly toward her, offering a polite smile. Clara, startled but composed, returned it. For a brief moment it seemed harmless, a duchess making polite conversation. But then Meghan spoke. Her tone was pleasant, curious, but edged with something Clara couldn't quite name. "You're with Vogue, aren't you?" Meghan asked, her voice smooth, her expression unreadable. Clara nodded. "Yes, I'm part of Ms. Wintour's team." Meghan tilted her head slightly. "That must be intense. She's very particular, I imagine." Clara smiled, careful to remain neutral. "She's precise, yes, but she's also incredibly inspiring to work for." There was a pause, too long to be casual. Meghan's eyes softened, but her words didn't. "Inspiring or intimidating?" she said lightly, the kind of comment that could be dismissed as humor or taken as a test. Around them, the crowd buzzed on, oblivious to the small, charged exchange. Clara hesitated before responding, choosing her words carefully. "She expects the best from everyone," she said simply. "Of course," Meghan replied, her tone tightening almost imperceptibly. "It's just that sometimes people mistake high standards for something else. Pressure can be misunderstood. Don't you think?" It wasn't a direct criticism, but the insinuation hung in the air like smoke. Meghan's smile remained poised, but Clara could feel her pulse quicken. She knew this was dangerous territory. Not because of Meghan, but because of who was standing only a few feet away. Anna had noticed the interaction almost instantly. She didn't interrupt. Not yet, but her gaze fixed on the scene with surgical precision. To anyone else, she looked merely observant. To those who knew her, she was assessing, measuring, preparing. Her intuition was honed over decades of managing egos larger than life itself. She could read a room the way a maestro reads a score, every note, every pause, every tension point. And in this moment, she saw one forming. As Meghan continued to speak, Anna's expression didn't change. Her assistant, standing beside her, glanced nervously between them. The crowd around them seemed blissfully unaware, continuing to clink glasses and trade compliments about the show. But beneath the surface, the dynamic of the room was tilting. The Duchess, radiant in white, and the editor, clad in muted tones, were orbiting closer. Clara tried to shift the conversation back to safer ground. "I think everyone here admires your sense of style, your grace," she said gently. "You've inspired a lot of young women." Meghan smiled, the compliment landing easily. "That's kind of you to say," she replied. "Though I think some people in this industry still prefer to keep me in a certain box." There it was, the edge, the barely veiled critique. Clara froze, uncertain how to respond. Meghan's gaze flickered briefly toward Anna, as if acknowledging her without speaking. It was a glance that could have meant anything, but in this world, nothing was ever meaningless. Anna moved. Slowly, deliberately, she took a step closer, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Conversations nearby faltered as people noticed her movement. She stopped just within earshot, her face calm, her voice measured. "Clara," she said, her tone light but decisive. "I think we're due at the designer's table." Clara nodded quickly, relief flooding her expression. "Of course, Ms. Wintour." Meghan turned toward Anna fully now, her smile widening. "Anna," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to be heard clearly. "How lovely to see you. I was just telling your assistant how impressive she is. You've trained them well." Anna paused for a fraction of a second, a pause that felt like eternity. Then she replied, her words clipped but smooth. "They don't require training, only respect." The exchange was brief, almost civil on the surface. But beneath that veneer, the air crackled. A few onlookers, pretending not to eavesdrop, caught the shift in tone. Meghan's expression tightened ever so slightly, though her smile remained intact. Anna's composure didn't falter. The two women stood there for a heartbeat too long, enough for every phone in the vicinity to capture the moment, even if no one yet understood its significance. Then, as swiftly as it had begun, the moment passed. Anna turned away, signaling to her team. Meghan, her eyes following her for a second, exhaled quietly and turned back to her group. The noise of the room resumed, but something intangible had changed. The hierarchy had been tested, and everyone present had felt it. Later that night, Attendees would struggle to describe the feeling. It wasn't an argument exactly, not in words, but it was a confrontation all the same. A silent storm brewing in a space too elegant for open conflict. Meghan's charm had met Anna's authority, and neither had yielded. The question of who had truly won was left hanging, unanswered. Outside, the Paris air was crisp, scented faintly with rain. Cars lined the street, their engines idling as chauffeurs waited for the night's royalty, both literal and symbolic, to emerge. Inside, Anna stood by the exit, her arms folded lightly, her sunglasses still in place despite the low light. Her team lingered nearby, quiet, efficient, alert. Across the room, Meghan adjusted the sleeve of her gown and whispered something to her assistant, who nodded and began to gather her belongings. For a brief moment, their eyes met again, two silhouettes framed by the glow of chandeliers. There were no words this time. There didn't need to be. The distance between them carried enough tension to fill an entire headline. The silent storm had passed through the room, leaving behind the stillness that only follows something powerful and unseen. In the coming hours, the whispers would spread. Some would insist that Anna had put Meghan in her place. Others would say Meghan had provoked her intentionally, testing the limits of fashion's matriarch. But those who had truly watched, those who understood the unspoken rules of this world, knew the truth. The battle hadn't been fought in raised voices or sharp gestures. It had been waged in silence, in glances, in the precision of words chosen and unchosen. And the storm, though quiet for now, was far from over. Paris, that night, had witnessed not just beauty, but power unveiled. The kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It simply shifts the air and leaves everyone breathing differently. Meghan walked out first, her white gown glowing under the streetlights like armor catching firelight. Anna followed minutes later, her expression unchanged, her stride unwavering. The city swallowed them both, its lights reflecting off the cobblestones as if erasing the scene. But those who were there would never forget. Something unspoken had been set in motion, and the world would soon find out what happens when silence finally decides to speak. The first sign that the evening had slipped beyond anyone's control came in the form of a simple misunderstanding. A small, almost invisible misstep that would soon ignite whispers throughout Paris. In every great scandal, there is a moment that seems trivial at first. A phrase taken the wrong way, a gesture misread, a tone misinterpreted. That was how this began. Not with a grand scene, not with raised voices or public humiliation, but with something quiet and subtle. A spark in a room filled with perfume, pride, and power. The reception after the Balenciaga show had reached its peak. Waiters in immaculate black suits glided between clusters of guests, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked more like jewelry than food. A soft electronic soundtrack pulsed beneath the hum of conversation, creating an atmosphere that was both celebratory and expectant. The runway spectacle was over, but the real theater, the politics, the hierarchies, the alliances was only beginning. It was in this half-lit, gold-edged space that Meghan Markle and Anna Wintour's orbits finally collided. Meghan had been moving gracefully from group to group, exchanging pleasantries, her smile unwavering. Every word, every laugh, every glance was measured for effect. She knew this part well. In her former life, she had navigated red carpets and palace receptions. She had been trained in the art of controlled charm. Tonight was no different, though her goal was not merely to be liked. It was to be seen, understood, respected. She wanted Paris to acknowledge her as more than a celebrity who had married into royalty. She wanted to be recognized as an independent force, a woman who belonged in these circles by merit, not by title. Across the room, Anna Wintour had settled near a tall, mirrored column, speaking quietly with a designer and two senior editors. Her demeanor, as always, was that of quiet authority. Nothing about her movements suggested distraction, yet her attention was divided. She knew where Meghan was at all times. She didn't need to look directly. She could sense her. It was the instinct of someone who had spent decades mastering the choreography of social dynamics. Power, after all, is less about volume than awareness. The misstep occurred when Meghan, after finishing a brief conversation with a stylist, turned toward one of Anna's assistants. Clara again, the same young woman who had endured that delicate exchange earlier. Meghan smiled warmly, perhaps too warmly, and gestured toward the staff member's clipboard. "You must be exhausted," Meghan said, her tone light, but her expression carrying an undertone of familiarity that blurred boundaries. "Keeping up with all this, it can't be easy." Clara smiled politely, caught off guard. "It's all part of the job, Your Grace. Please call me Meghan," she replied, her voice softening. "I know what it's like to work for someone who expects perfection all the time. It's a lot." There it was, the line that would set everything into motion. The sentence seemed innocuous, perhaps even sympathetic, but context is everything. To anyone else, it might have sounded like small talk. To Anna, whose ears were trained to detect the subtlest vibrations of disrespect, it was something else entirely. The tone, the phrasing, it carried the faintest trace of condescension. A duchess, however casually, implying that her staff understood the strain of working under someone demanding. Clara froze. Her training told her to remain neutral, but she could feel the weight of Anna's presence across the room. Before she could respond, Meghan added, "Don't worry, I'm sure she appreciates you. People like her always do eventually." The smile that followed was radiant, almost disarming. Could have been a joke or a judgment. Anna moved before she even realized she had. Her steps were unhurried, but her focus was absolute. The crowd shifted subtly, as if the temperature in the room had dropped. Meghan, sensing her approach, turned gracefully, her expression open and welcoming. "Anna," she said, extending a hand, "I was just admiring how seamless your team is. You must be very proud of them." Anna stopped a few feet away. She didn't take the hand. Her voice, when it came, was calm, deliberate, and precise enough to slice glass. "I am," she said, "which is why I don't take kindly to anyone speaking to them as if they need defending." The room stilled. A dozen conversations faltered mid-sentence. The sound of a champagne flute being placed too hard on a tray rang louder than it should have. Meghan's hand lowered slowly. Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes sharpened. "Oh, I didn't mean," she began, but Anna's interruption was gentle, unyielding. "I'm sure you didn't," Anna said. "But my staff doesn't require sympathy. They require professionalism." There it was, the word that cracked the air open, professionalism. In a world ruled by etiquette and optics, it was the closest thing to an accusation without being one. It implied imbalance, impropriety, an overstep. For a moment, Meghan didn't respond. Her silence stretched into tension. Around them, people began pretending not to listen while listening harder than ever. "I completely understand," Meghan said finally, her voice measured but slightly strained. "Respect goes both ways, doesn't it?" Anna's lips curved just slightly, though it wasn't a smile. "It should," she replied, and then turned to Clara. "Take a moment outside, please." Clara hesitated, glancing at Meghan, then nodded and disappeared into the hallway. The two women remained facing each other, their poise immaculate, their eyes locked. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But in that silence, every ounce of tension that had been building all evening condensed into something palpable. This wasn't merely a disagreement about manners. It was a collision of values. Anna's belief in order, precision, and hierarchy clashing with Meghan's insistence on emotional openness, empathy, and equality. Both women thought they were right. Both believed the other represented everything wrong with power. After a long pause, Anna spoke again, her tone still calm but her words heavier now. "You can't bully my staff," she said simply. It was said quietly, almost kindly, but it landed with the force of a gavel. A few people close enough to hear froze in place. Meghan blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. She recovered quickly, her smile returning like a mask. "That's not what I was doing," she replied softly. "I was having a conversation, but I appreciate your concern." Anna tilted her head slightly, studying her. "Then we'll leave it at that," she said before turning away. Her exit was as deliberate as her arrival, slow, poised, and final. Meghan stood still for a moment, her face calm but her pulse betraying the storm beneath. Her assistant approached, whispering something into her ear, and Meghan nodded, exhaling quietly. The room, still half frozen, began to move again, the illusion of normalcy returning. Laughter resumed, glasses clinked, conversations picked up where they had left off. But the tone had shifted, the balance had shifted. People avoided looking directly at Meghan now, afraid to be caught in the aftershock of something larger than themselves. She turned toward the nearest mirror, adjusting a strand of hair, her expression returning to serenity. But in her eyes, something had changed. It wasn't anger, it was awareness. Awareness that she had stepped into a world that operated by codes older and colder than she had anticipated. Awareness that, in one sentence, Anna Wintour had drawn a line she wasn't meant to cross. Outside, Paris glowed as it always did, indifferent to human dramas, eternal in its elegance. But inside that gilded room, something fundamental had shifted. The Duchess who had built her identity on breaking barriers had just collided with a woman who defined them. Both would emerge with their dignity intact, at least in public. But the story was already out of their hands. By midnight, the first murmurs had reached the journalists still lingering outside the venue. By dawn, they had evolved into headlines. What had begun as a misunderstanding, a brief, offhand remark, was now being replayed, reinterpreted, reimagined in every corner of the internet. Every word, every glance, every pause between Anna Wintour and Meghan Markle had become material for speculation. And in that speculation, both women's power took on new dimensions. Anna had protected her order. Meghan had defended her intent. But Paris, ever hungry for spectacle, didn't care who was right, cared only for the story. And that night, the story had begun with a single misstep. A moment so small it could have been forgotten, if it hadn't changed everything. The party went on, but the warmth had drained from the air. Meghan stayed a little longer, enough to maintain the illusion of ease, before slipping out quietly into the cool night. Cameras flashed as her car pulled away, the light catching on her white dress one last time. Inside, Anna returned to her seat, removed her glasses for a moment, and exhaled. For her, it was already over. For the world, it was just beginning. The line would echo through Paris before sunrise, whispered between stylists and editors, carried by the wind that sweeps down from the Seine and through the cobblestoned alleys of fashion's sacred heart. "You can't bully my staff." 6 words, delivered without rage, without volume. Yet they cracked through the glamour of Balenciaga's after-show like the sound of glass breaking. No one in that hall would forget how Anna Wintour said it. The tone was quiet, almost gentle, yet final. It wasn't a reprimand shouted in anger, but a declaration made with absolute control. The kind of control that had built her empire and defined her for decades. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone who understood her reputation. For years, Anna had been both feared and revered for her exacting standards, her cold detachment, her reputation as fashion's most unflinching arbiter. But in that instant, she was no longer the feared icon behind the sunglasses. She was the defender of a code, the guardian of respect, drawn to act not from vanity, but from principle. Moments after the words left her lips, the room fell into a silence that felt alive. Conversations halted mid-sentence, laughter died in throats, and the hum of music seemed to dim itself, as if even the speakers knew they were intruding on something delicate. Meghan Markle, poised and polished, stood opposite Anna in her glowing white dress, her expression unreadable. The Duchess, accustomed to being scrutinized, maintained her composure. Her lips parted slightly, as if to respond, but no sound came. The crowd's collective breath hung between them, waiting to see what would happen next. Anna didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. Her stance was perfectly neutral, hands folded, posture straight, the faintest trace of steel in her calm demeanor. That was her way. She never needed theatrics. Her authority came from precision. Those who had been around her long enough recognized the subtle shift in the air. When Anna spoke in that measured tone, she meant every word. Meghan, on the other hand, was trapped in a moment that defied her usual mastery of optics. For years, she had learned how to turn attention into narrative, how to reframe criticism into empowerment, controversy into conversation. But this wasn't a media interview or a paparazzi ambush. This was a confrontation in real time, in a room filled with the very people whose opinions shaped culture. A single misstep could become legend. She smiled, polite, composed, deliberate. "Anna, I wasn't bullying anyone," she said softly, her voice carrying the practiced evenness of someone used to public defense. "I was having a friendly chat. Perhaps it came across differently." Anna's expression didn't shift. Behind the tinted glasses, her gaze remained steady. "Perhaps," she said, her tone like silk stretched over stone. Then, a beat later, "But words matter, especially here." The pause that followed was unbearable. Guests began pretending to check their phones. Others whispered into champagne flutes. A few slipped toward the hallway, unwilling to witness what might come next. The PR teams, always alert to disaster, began their silent work. Texting, whispering, calculating how to contain what they sensed was about to spiral. Then Meghan took a step closer, bridging the narrow space between them. Her smile remained, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a mix of indignation and disbelief. She lowered her voice slightly, ensuring only Anna and those closest could hear. "I meant no disrespect," she said, "but I also don't appreciate being spoken to like a subordinate." Anna's response was instantaneous. "Then perhaps you should reconsider how you speak to mine." The line landed like the closing of a door. There was no escalation, no raised tone, but the effect was devastating. It was elegance turned into weaponry, a masterclass in authority executed with surgical restraint. Meghan's expression froze for half a second, a heartbeat's worth of tension, but that was all Anna needed. The hierarchy had been restored, unspoken but absolute. For a moment, neither moved. The air around them was heavy with the perfume of roses and nerves. Somewhere in the distance, the hum of a camera lens zooming in broke the silence. Meghan blinked, gathering herself, and stepped back. "Well," she said lightly, her voice steady again, "it seems Paris still loves its hierarchies." Anna finally removed her glasses, a rare act, one that signaled she was done with pretense. Her eyes, sharp and calm, locked on Meghan's. "Paris," she said, "loves respect." Then she turned away. Her exit was as graceful as her words were cutting. The crowd parted instinctively, making way for her as she walked toward the corridor leading to the private lounge. Her assistants followed in formation, silent, efficient, composed. It was over, or at least it appeared to be. But Meghan didn't move immediately. She stood there, watching Anna's retreat, the corners of her mouth curving into something between a smile and disbelief. For a woman who had been at the center of palace politics, global headlines, and relentless controversy, she was no stranger to conflict. Yet this was different. This wasn't a tabloid feud or a scripted confrontation. It was a raw clash of influence, of unspoken codes. Her aide approached, whispering urgently. Meghan nodded, her expression smoothing back into serenity. "It's fine," she murmured. "Completely fine." But inside, she knew the story was already writing itself. Right there, in real time, among the murmuring elite. Every glance, every whisper, every phone discreetly recording or messaging would carry fragments of this moment into the world before dawn. Meanwhile, Anna reached the private lounge, her composure unbroken. She handed her coat to an attendant, accepted a glass of water, and stood before a floor-length mirror. Her reflection stared back, poised, impassive, victorious. She had done what few could, defended her standards without losing an ounce of dignity. But even she knew what would come next. She'd been in this business long enough to understand that silence was only temporary. Soon, her words would spread, twisted, interpreted, dissected. But she didn't care. She hadn't spoken for them. She had spoken for herself, and for the structure she had spent a lifetime upholding. Back in the main hall, conversations began to recover. But the shift was permanent. The laughter was too sharp, the smiles too forced. A journalist nearby scribbled furiously in a notebook. Two stylists exchanged looks that said everything words couldn't. Someone whispered, "Did you hear what she said?" And someone else replied, "Of course I did. Everyone did." Outside, the photographers waited, oblivious to the scene that had just unfolded within. They expected the usual photos. The glamorous departures, the gowns, the smiles. What they would soon capture instead were two women leaving the same building minutes apart. Each immaculate, each composed, each wearing a different kind of armor. When Meghan emerged first, flashes erupted like fireworks. She paused briefly, her face calm, the faintest trace of tension behind her eyes. Her aide guided her into the waiting car, and as the door closed, she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Inside the vehicle, the world outside blurred into streaks of gold and white. She looked down at her phone, which was already buzzing with messages. The story was spreading. Anna left shortly after. She didn't acknowledge the photographers. Her driver opened the door, she stepped inside, and the car pulled away in silence. No gestures, no smiles, no need for statements. Her restraint was her commentary. By morning, the city's digital heartbeat had already seized the story. Hashtag Wintour vs. Markle trended across platforms. Rumors multiplied. Wintour defends staff from Duchess. Markle scolded in Paris. Balenciaga backstage turns tense. Some praised Anna for setting boundaries. Others condemned her for elitism. Meghan's supporters called it another example of powerful women being pitted against each other. Anna's defenders called it leadership. In truth, neither had intended for this to happen. Yet both had played their parts perfectly, because they couldn't have done otherwise. Meghan was driven by empathy and self-assertion. Anna by discipline and command. They were products of their worlds, reflections of different philosophies of strength. One believed in being heard, the other believed in being respected. That night in Paris, those beliefs collided in 6 simple words that would outlive the dresses, the show, and perhaps even their reputations. Days later, journalists would still write about it. Publicists would still deny it. Those who had witnessed it would pretend to forget. But everyone would remember the moment itself. The cold precision of Anna's voice, the stunned composure of Meghan's face, and the invisible ripple that moved through the crowd. It was more than a feud. It was a reminder of what happens when two different empires of power, one built on silence, the other on speech, try to share the same room. And as Paris settled back into its rhythm, the phrase remained, lingering like perfume after the party has ended. "You can't bully my staff." 6 words that sounded like etiquette but carried the weight of an era. Spoken by a woman who knew that true authority doesn't need to shout. The shock did not arrive all at once. It rippled, subtle at first, like a tremor beneath marble floors, then spread outward until every corner of the Balenciaga reception pulsed with tension. The confrontation between Anna Wintour and Meghan Markle had lasted mere moments, yet its aftermath felt eternal. It lingered in the air, in half-heard whispers, in the nervous glances exchanged between editors, publicists, and assistants who suddenly seemed unsure of where to stand or what to say.